Friends, welcome back to another Pints with Jack Skype session. It's so good to have you here. And as always, I am joined by my dear friend, David. David, welcome, my friend.
Thank you.
We did get it right because I have edited them now. But anyways, as you guys know, if you've been watching these, the main thing we do is we do the Pints with Jack podcast. And that goes deep into chapters of C.S. Lewis. So if you're coming across this and don't listen to our podcast, go check that out. If you're a regular listener, this is where we dive in and we go a little bit deeper on a specific topic, and we try to connect it to our lives and provide some thoughtful commentary around it. So David, we just finished the first chapter of part 2. So we've spent 22 weeks going through this book in all of part 1, and now there's 4 chapters left total in part 2.
We've actually spent less than 22 weeks because we were taking them 2 and sometimes 3 chapters at a time.
Yes, I'm thinking of the Mere Christianity days. We learned quickly from those days. 50 weeks to go through a book.
I'm fine with
it. But anyways, there was a lot in this chapter. This is when it's beginning to unpack what we have been going through. So before I kick this off and take this in a certain direction, I want to see what jumped out to you and maybe what was the biggest thing that you took away from this.
Well, if this was a movie, this would now have a series of flashbacks from a different point of view. So we as viewers would realize that we got one particular version of events, but from a different point of view, things looked rather different. We have 2 major revelations in this chapter. The first one relates to Redeval, the fact that she felt hurt and isolated by Orwell's love for the fox and then Psyche. And then the next one is regarding Bardia. When the Queen goes and speaks to his wife, Ansit, she then finds out that she had been working Bardia to death and that he was too good a man to complain, and that Ansit was too good a wife to try and manipulate her husband into doing what she wanted. So I think the central point of this chapter is we have definitive proof that Orwell has been an unreliable narrator. There have been lots of hints about it throughout the book, but now we are absolutely certain that what Orwell has been telling us hasn't necessarily been the truth, and in fact it could be very different. So she has been living her life with one particular view on events, and it turns out that there was one that was quite different. One in which she wasn't a great sister, and she wasn't a great boss, and that she discarded some people and consumed, chewed up, and spat out others.
And what's your favorite Latin phrase?
Quid Latine dictum sit altum vidita. Anything said in Latin sounds profound. But my number 2 is incurvatus in se, which was a line used by the fathers, particularly also picked up by Luther, of a soul turned in on itself, which we saw again and again in the Great Divorce, and which is probably a pretty good explanation or a pretty good description of Orwell.
And would you say it's fair to articulate the first part of the book either as an example of her soul turned within, or an example of her soul turning more and more within until it became closed off?
Yeah, the latter.
It's what I liked about this part 2, and we'll obviously be unpacking some of this more the coming weeks, this is just the first chapter, was this is the first example we see of that becoming unwound. As you pointed out, there was those 2 big events. And what really stuck out to me in this chapter was after she's sitting down with Ansit, Bardia's wife, and hearing one of the other perspectives, the other sides of the story, she'd created this narrative in her head that was all her self-centered perspective. And now she's hearing another side. It was the first example of something turning her, I hate to use a flip of it, but without, I guess. If we look at the one way is bad, turning her without and seeing another perspective. And I wanted us to talk about that on this Skype session here, because we've talked a lot about turning within, closing off. I've written about it in blog posts. We've talked about it in previous videos. But a natural question is, if we recognize in ourselves examples of this, and I've had it in my life where I've turned within and my wounds and my hurts have prevented me from seeing things from other people's perspective, it begs the question, what can we do to turn without? What can we do to remedy that situation? And there was a scene when Ansit is honestly just crushing Orwell. She's destroying her entire narrative with truth after truth after truth. She's showing her, look at it from this perspective. Here's my perspective. Here's what you did to Bardia. Here's what you're doing to my son. And Orwell gets angered, so frustrated, because of course her ego's hit, the truth is piercing her, and her walls go up instantly. But then it says, after her anger subsided, the truth started to set in. And that stuck out to me as one example of how you can begin to get out of that state. Truth can set you free. And in this case, it came from an outside perspective. But I'm curious your thoughts on that, but more importantly, maybe a few examples of something that we can do as people when we feel like we have turned within. Our hurts and our wounds have walled us to being able to empathize or see or love properly to get out of that state.
So what can we do to uncovert us in say? What can we do to turn ourselves outwards? I think part of it is through other people. Actually, I think that's probably the larger part of it, because I could point to lots of introspection stuff, but I would say that while that is useful, it is also very easy to delude ourselves. Orwell managed to delude herself for years, but it's only when external people, other people come and speak to her, that the truth, or at least the other perspective, and I'm pretty sure it's truth in this case, is actually shown to us, which I think shows the real importance of community. You know, do I have a group of people in my life who would be willing to speak truth if they saw that I was heading off in a direction that wasn't good? Or do we have a close enough bond such that A, they would care enough about me to tell me, and B, that we would have a strong enough relationship that I would be able to receive what they have to say to me, and it still not jeopardize the relationship that we have. I actually remember, I was trying to think of what's been the nearest equivalent to the kind of experience that Orwell has in this chapter in my own life. And I think it's when I was dating someone and she said, I feel like I am a list on your to-do list. And I was horrified and angry, and I realized in an instant she was absolutely right. That's exactly how I'd been treating her. But she did say it from a point of view of love. She didn't think that I was being malicious in what I was doing, but I was treating her in a way that wasn't good, and that I didn't want to treat her. So I think the having a close community of people that you are really friends with, not just simply acquaintances, not just Facebook friends, not just people that you see at church events every now and again, but people who are actually involved in your life. That, I think, is essential for turning yourself outwards, because it means that there are people in your life that you think highly enough of that you're willing to even invite that kind of feedback. And this is why I've always been part of small men's groups, so that we actually have a regular forum where we can meet together and talk about what's going on, and sometimes call each other out.
And imagine how tough that must have been for her as well. Because if she cared for you, and it sounds like it came out of a place of love, you getting angry could have been a scary thing, that she could have pushed you away. Maybe your walls went so far up, you'd say, I'm done with you. And that's a scary thing. So not only is it hard to hear it, but it's hard to speak it to people. Mm-hmm. And it takes a deep amount of tough love and just love in general, because to love someone is to be willing to let them go. And so sometimes you have to say the thing that is scary and could mean that the relationship ends, but it's what the person needs to hear. Mm-hmm. The thing I would say too is, I think that's spot on. I mean, that is just perfect advice. Surround yourself with people who can speak truth into your life. Talk to them, be vulnerable, listen to them.
And I would also say, tell them that they can tell you this.
Yes, invite them. I like the word invitation.
I've had a few people in my life where, when we've become better and better friends, that I've actually said, hey, listen, I think you're a great person, and I think you're smart and wise, and you care about me, so I want you to have free reign. If you see me saying or doing stuff that you don't think is good, I want you to be able to come and tell me.
Yes. And I want to add from a non-outside perspective. So what can you do? That's the first thing I would say. But I had this recently, and this worked for me. and I'll actually give some concrete examples, but ultimately going to Christ through prayer. But what I found for people who maybe are just stumbling across this or someone sent it to, we come from the Catholic perspective. And so I had this where something was on my heart and my mind, and I was really wrestling with it and just asking for clarity and trying to open myself up and inviting Christ to be that friend. And I went to adoration for an hour and sitting in the presence of Christ. It's amazing what will be placed on your heart. At this time, I started a novena, was praying, went to adoration, and it is amazing when you create that space for God to speak to you, the way that He will reveal things to you. Maybe slowly, maybe over time, maybe it's not going to be just hitting you across the head in one sitting, but He's also that person. But we have to invite Him in. And I don't want to belittle just a quick 5-minute prayer. Do 5-minute prayers, those are great, start there, but creating that space for Him to really speak to you. Whether that's even in silence, opening your journal and just writing in it. And you'd be surprised then where your hand goes and the thoughts that come to your mind. Those were some things that really helped me. So a combination of what you said and what I said was a double, I don't even know the right thing I'm going to say here, but
a 1-2 punch.
1-2 punch. That's exactly what I'd like to say. It was a 1-2 punch and it smacked me across the face. And yeah, and that's a really strong way to start turning without and get that healing process to go.
Yeah. And the other thing I would also say more generally about reversing the effects of incurvatus in se is to put your focus outside of yourself. Is there a place in your church or in your community where you can serve? It might be as simple as putting out chairs. Because if you start doing that, then you start exercising the muscles which think about other people. And it's the classic Lewis misquote. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less.
I was just going to say, as Rick Warren said.
As Rick Warren says, exactly. So if you have more things in your life that take your gaze from your navel back out into the world, that is also something that will foster you to do that more naturally, to look to the outside world and to the needs of other people.
That's exactly right.
Which is why I'm such a caring, giving sort of person. Remember, humility.
David. Humility, yes. Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end, is on David's humility. And so, David, thank you for joining me. Thank you for providing your wisdom. I love doing this. And so until next week, when we will go further up.
And further in. Cheers.
Cheers, my friend.